All right, we are back with another video, this time talking about Total Drama. Now, my last Total Drama video, I did a ranking of all the final boots or third place finishers in the history of Total Drama. And in today's video, what I wanted to do is sort of expand upon that concept a bit more and do a what if video. In this video, we'll be breaking down what would have happened if every final boot had won final three immunity. So basically, how this is going to work is I'm going to assume that there'll be a normal final three round where the third final boot will have final immunity. They will get to vote someone out, take someone to the end. And to make things a bit more systematic, I decided to also have this be a jury vote scenario because realistically, if this had been in the actual show, it probably would have been a challenge. And knowing how the show writes its finales, it's in all likelihood that no matter who the final two is, they would have made it a close contest, allowing for multiple endings. But for this, I decided to be a bit more definitive and make it a jury vote so that we have a bit more interesting results. So, like I said, we'll be going through each season of the show and breaking down what would have happened in these scenarios. So, starting off, we have Total Drama Island, where Heather has final three immunity. I feel like she would take Owen to the end. While she never particularly liked Owen, she had a pretty blatant rivalry and dislike towards Gwen throughout the season. We see that in the finale, where Heather chooses to side with Owen from the beginning, and I feel like that would carry over into this situation. However, Heather would be demolished in a jury vote. She might get Eva's vote, but Owen would pretty much get every other vote. I mean, first we have Trent, who would be upset over the whole kissing situation. Like wouldn't be happy with him there. Bridget never really liked Heather, so that's another vote for Owen. Lindsay was burned by Heather on her way out, and she even cussed at her, really showing her betrayal. And obviously, we saw in the actual show that Lindsay, as a dare, had Heather shave her head. So there's clearly some bad blood there. DJ seemed to genuinely like Owen, so I guess that's a pro Owen vote there. Izzy, of course, would vote for Owen as they sort of had a relationship, but not really. I mean, that would carry over to Jeff and Lashana. Duncan might give Heather a sympathy vote here, but he is closer to Owen, and I wouldn't be surprised if he did vote for Owen in this case. And of course, there's Gwen, who's a pretty locked Owen vote there, largely for the same reasons. And really, even if Heather had taken Gwen to the end, thinking that Gwen would be less of a jury threat, I feel like the same jury votes would largely apply here, and really even more so in the case of Trent and Lashana. So really, no matter what, Heather was losing this season if it were a jury vote. So there's that. Next up, we have Total Drama Action, and this is a bit of a weird situation as the final four episode was a double elimination episode where Courtney was voted out, only for Owen to immediately be fired uh, for failing to be a mole for production. So in this case, I'm going to consider Owen as the final boot, as Courtney was technically voted out at Final Four, and Owen was technically ejected in the third place spot, and I considered him as such in my final boot ranking. So for this case, we're going to assume that Owen doesn't get fired. There is a final three round, and he does somehow get final three immunity there. And again, he's a mole for production, and with him having a $50,000 prize, I can only assume that he wouldn't be playing to win himself. So I can see the argument that he wouldn't be allowed to even have final immunity here. But on the other hand, him being in the final two would sabotage the players still in the game due to there being fewer spots at the end for them to take up. Now, in terms of he would take, I think if we're basing this purely on how Owen would act naturally, I would say Owen takes Duncan to the end, as he's closer to Duncan and probably thinks he deserves the money more. But what makes it interesting is that, assuming the jury votes fell naturally, I actually think there's a strong chance that Owen would win against Duncan, as there are four jury votes that would lean towards him. There's Lashana, who had a pretty rocky relationship with Duncan on the season and could vote for Owen based solely off that. Lindsay and Beth are both closer to Owen and would lean towards him, and Harold would feel confident enough to stand up to Duncan and deny him a win. I think only Justin and Courtney would vote for Duncan in this scenario. Now, obviously, a major factor in all this is whether these jurors would feel comfortable letting Owen be a two-time winner, especially after he had already been voted out. I talked a lot in my What If Every Season Had a Jury Vote video that, generally speaking, a lot of these players wouldn't be voting based on gameplay and are much more swayed by their personal relationships to the finalists. And I think that would generally hold, assuming that the two-time winner thing isn't a deal breaker. And I also think that it would work from the context of Owen being a mole for production. as in this case, he would deny the win to the players that made it to the end without being voted out. Because I think in the alternative scenario where he takes Beth, it would be a lot closer. Beth would have 2 locked votes in Lindsay and Harold. Owen would have 1 locked vote in Duncan, leaving Lashana, Justin, and Courtney as swing votes. While Owen could still win in that scenario, him taking Duncan would be a more surefire way of denying both Duncan and Beth the win. Plus, production can use the $50,000 deal and the fact that Owen had already won as an excuse to not hand him the full million, saving the show money. So, either way you look at it, I think it would be an interesting case to look at, both from a gameplay perspective, but also from the context of production wanting to screw over these contestants. So, I think that's how it would break down. Next up, we have Total Drama World Tour, where we have Cody winning Final 3 immunity. He clearly votes out Alejandro here. He saw him as a bigger threat and saw that Heather was good to him throughout the season. So I think he would base his votes off that. In this scenario, Cody would have the advantage. I mean, we saw in the final Aftermath show that most of the eliminated players and players that weren't on World Tour, they were on Team Cody, and he would most likely win in this scenario. However, I think the actual vote will be closer than people assume. Now, again, obviously in the Aftermath show, we saw most of the players there be on Team Cody. But if again, most of those people are either pre-merge boots or people that weren't on the season. The only relevant people from Team Cody are Duncan and Owen, and there's also Sierra, so that gives Cody 3 votes. Just one more to win. But getting that last vote is trickier than it seems. We have Courtney, who never really respected Cody that much, and while her relationship with Heather during the season was pretty mixed, I think Courtney would vote for Heather as a show of respect. There's Alejandro, who I also see voting for Heather out of respect, and that leaves Blanley, who could either give Cody the win 4-2 or vote for Heather and force a tie. But even if she forces a tie and we use the same tiebreaker I used last video, pre-mergers get to the vote, then it becomes a very decisive Cody win, with everyone except possibly Tyler voting for him. So I still think Cody would have the advantage. I think he would most likely win in a final 2 against Heather. However, I think what people forget is that most of the pre-mergers wouldn't be allowed to vote, and those are the people that make up the bulk of Team Cody. So I think it's a bit more interesting than it seems at first glance. Next up, we have Total Drama Revenge of the Island. And in this case, we have Zoey having Final 3 immunity. She clearly votes out Lightning here and takes Cameron. While in that episode, she was Commando Zoey and she viewed Cameron as being a bit weak and unworthy. I think by the end of it, she was sort of reminded about her friendship with Cameron and would follow suit based off that. Now, the question is who wins? I think Zoe would have the advantage going in, but there is a possibility of a tie. Now, first there's Mike, who is a locked Zoe vote, pretty obvious there. Joe is a bit more interesting because she never really liked either of them, saw herself as superior. But what's interesting is that after she was voted out, she does show a level of respect towards Cameron, like the person that did vote her out, even if it's viewed as him learning from her. So I guess she's a Cameron vote. We have Lightning, who is similar to Joe, except he voted out Zoe in the original Final 3, as he saw her as the bigger threat. So by that logic, I would assume he would vote for Zoe here. And then we have Scott in the position to either give Zoe the win or force a tie. Now, I did think about this a bit, and I think he would lean towards voting for Zoe out of respect, which would obviously give Zoe a 3-1 win in this scenario. But if Scott forces a tie, then things would become a bit more interesting. But I do think he would probably vote for Zoe in this case, so I'll give Zoe the win here. Next up, we have Total Drama All Stars, and obviously in this case, we have Scott having Final 3 immunity. I feel like he votes out Mike in this situation, seeing him as a bigger threat. And through that, we get a Final 2 of Scott versus Zoe, and this one is interesting. First, we have Duncan, who again is impressive at this point. But in my original "What If" every season was a jury vote scenario video, I had Duncan cast a vote anyway. So I'd say in this case he would go either way, as he was shown having a positive relationship with both Scott and Zoe. In the end, I'll say he votes for Scott, as Scott was the one to take on Mal in this situation, something Zoe wasn't willing to do. Cameron is a locked Zoe vote in this case, so there's that. Next, we have Alejandro, who in theory could go either way, but like Duncan, he tries convincing Zoe that Mal is evil, only for Zoe to be blinded by her love of Mike. Now, things weren't perfect with Scott either, as they occasionally got into confrontations, and Scott voted out Alejandro after being convinced by Mal that Alejandro was responsible for Cameron, quote unquote, kissing Courtney. But I think in this scenario, with Scott voting out Mike, Alejandro would respect that enough to vote for Scott, especially after Zoey was unwilling to, again, take the shot before he was taken out of the game. Next, there's Courtney, who, again, could go either way. She had a relationship with Scott during the season, and while she wasn't super happy with him on her way out, I think there's enough there for her to vote for Scott. Add on to that she wasn't that close to Zoey, only attempted to form an alliance after all other options were wasted, and again, Scott voting out Mal, I think Courtney votes for Scott. However, it could go the other way. So right now, Scott has 3 votes, but I think Zoey would get the other 2 with Gwen and Mike, forcing a tie. Now, the weird thing about this tie situation is that despite this being a season with returning players, there are multiple pre-mergers that have zero relationship with Scott or Zoey, but we'll try to go through them anyway. So first there's Lindsay, who is a Zoey vote, I guess. Lightning is a Scott vote, I guess. Joe is probably a Scott vote. And then I have Sam as being a Zoey vote. So we're at a 2-2 tie among the pre-mergers. Next, there's Heather, who is a Scott vote, I guess. And Sierra is a Zoe vote, I guess. And with that, we have a deadlock. And at that point, who knows how they would resolve it? I mean, I guess you could take away Duncan's vote, as again, he's in prison at this point, which would give Zoe the win. There's also the chance that Courtney could still be bitter at Scott, causing her to vote for Zoe. So I think Zoe would have more opportunities to win in this final 2 based on their personal relationships. The issue with her is the perception that she failed to realize that Mal was evil, despite others warning her of such, while Scott was the one to take the shot in this scenario. There's also Gwen, who says on her way out that she's rooting for Zoe to win, but that's under the context of Mal still being in the game. But with Mal defeated and with Scott being the one to do so, that's something that could change her mind. So if that ends up being a major consideration, there is a chance Scott could win. But again, if we're basing this purely off stuff like Duncan's jury vote as well as personal relationships, I think Zoe would have the advantage. So that's something. And finally, we have Total Drama Pahkitew Island, this time with Sugar having final 3 immunity. She clearly votes out Sky here. She was trying to vote out Sky since the final 4, and I think that would hold here. And admittedly, this is a pretty boring final 2 scenario. I feel like this is a pretty clear Sean win. First, there's Dave, who had a pretty positive relationship with Sean for the most part. While he may have lost his mind, he probably still would be reminded of that, especially over someone like Sugar. Next, there's Max, who you think would vote for Sugar based on the fact that they're both villains on the season, but Max was actually pretty annoyed by Sugar, and I could see him voting for Sean because of that. Even so, I don't think it matters too much. Scarlett could go either way, as she never had that much of a relationship with either of them. I'll say she's a Sugar vote, but again, it won't matter too much as both Jasmine and Sky would be pretty secure Sean votes, and really, you could either see this as being a pretty clear Sean win or a unanimous Sean win, or one in which Sugar will get 1 vote. But in either case, it doesn't really matter too much. I feel like Sean would win in this case. So there's that. And there we go. That will do it for this video breaking down what if every final boot have final immunity. I do have more total drama videos planned in the future, some more what if videos. I have a season ranking coming up. And eventually down the line, I want to do a player ranking for total drama. So stay tuned for that. But for now, that is the video. See ya.